Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for the introduction, Todd. So today I'll be giving a talk that summarizes a lot of the work that I've done at Motorola Research for the last 10 years, as well as a class that I've been teaching at MIT. So I split my life between Motorola and Chicago, where I've been working for 11 years, really focused on creating new services that increase connection in strong tie social relationships. And then I also teach at MIT. I've been teaching a Mobile HCI class now for the last 6 years. That's grown quite big. We had 91 students in this past semester, and they design, build, and evaluate new mobile systems. So I'll be talking a little bit about what some of the students have done in the class, and a lot about the research that I've done at Motorola. So I'll start with a little bit of background on mobile computing. I'll talk about the mobile experience research model that I've created, and then give a case study, a few case studies actually, from research at Motorola. So I want you to all think back to 1995 and think about if you were out someplace and you needed to get a hold of someone. How did you do that? You found a payphone and you hoped that they were still at home, or they were still in the office, or they were in a place where you could contact them. Let's say you were out driving someplace or trying to walk someplace and you wanted to know how to get somewhere. Well, you went to the gas station and got a map and found out where you were going. And you asked someone for directions, right? These were mobile experiences in the 1990s. This is how you lived out in the world when you weren't at a fixed desk, when you didn't have a phone available to you. If you wanted to share a photo with someone, you had to take a photo on a camera. And if you had a digital camera at the time, that you were lucky, and you could connect it to a computer and download the pictures and email it to someone, and the next time they checked their email, well, maybe they could see what you had just seen. There was no way to share a live experience with someone. So now think of today, and think of what it's like to be mobile out in the world today. If you're late, you can call someone, and they have a phone, and you have a phone, and you can reach them wherever they are. If you're lost, you open up maps, and you get nice turn-by-turn directions to exactly where you want to go. If you take a photo, and you want to share it with someone, you have a million different ways you can share it, more than you could even handle. And you can even stream your live experience with someone so they can see exactly what you're seeing that very second. So these are mobile experiences. These are new ways for people to interact with each other out in the world. And those are the kinds of experiences that I try to create with my research. So the title of the book is Building Mobile Experiences. And by building, I really mean everything from generating the concept, designing it, building it, and then studying how it's used over months and months and months in someone's daily life, and seeing how it affects their life and their relationships with their friends and family. By mobile, I mean systems that are meant for use out in the world, in various places, and the transition between those places. And by experiences, I mean new ways to interact with each other and new ways to interact with the world. So you'll see these themes coming through in everything that I talk about here tonight, going from start to finish for systems that are mobile and change the way that people experience something out in the world. So now I want to talk about the phone a little bit. And this was the first phone I had that was more than a phone. It was sort of a smartphone. It had data. It had apps. You could install Java apps on this little thing. And you had data connection, which was pretty neat for 2001. And this is around the time I first joined Motorola and really started to make me think about the possibility of what could be done on a mobile device, and realize that these were the next computers that were coming. Then I had a phone with a camera on it, and that really opened up the possibilities to sharing your world with other people, letting people see what you were experiencing at any given time. And then, phones evolved, right? We got touch screens, we've got social connectivity, we had the whole social web rise in the meantime, and they've been enabling more and more rich experiences, adding different sensors, adding different ways to learn about the world, learn about the environment, and share that with others. So mobile phones have brought us a whole toolkit of technology that we can use to enable new experiences, right? So you have anytime, anywhere voice and data connectivity. That happened a long time ago. But now you have ubiquitous photo capture and sharing. You have all kinds of sensing that you can sense where someone is and what they're doing and what their environment is like. You can build contextually relevant services. But at Motorola, we really started to say, when all this was coming around, what is all of this good for? How can we use these devices to help make people's lives better? How does it make us better friends, family, or citizens out in the world? So my main research question that I've been addressing over the last decade is, how can these pervasive media devices enable new ways to strengthen people's strong tie social relationships? And I'll give a bunch of examples of that here in the talk. But I'm also interested in how can we understand how these new services are adopted and integrated into daily life. So for me, you build a demo, you build a prototype, it's interesting, but what's really interesting is finding out how it fits into daily life, how people use it, how it changes the way that they experience the world. And along with that, the question was, what combination of methods can be repeatedly applied to create and commercialize these new experiences? And that's really the focus of the book, is this toolkit of methods, and that's what I'll be talking about here, really looking at what we found that we can apply again and again and again to develop new experiences in new domains. So the goal of my group at Motorola is really finding new opportunities for applications, services, and devices in given topic spaces. And I'll talk about some of those topics that we addressed, from image sharing, to music sharing, to health and wellness, to intergenerational communication. And then we develop key IP in that domain, and then build new concepts and eventually turn them into products. So we're very active on the academic side in publishing, but we work for a company. The end goal is to get a product out there in the market that we can get people using. So the basic research philosophy is a user-centered design process where we learn from people, we build concepts quickly, and then we get them in the field for long-term use. And we see how people start to use those, we learn from how they use it, we improve the concept or build new concepts, get it in the field again, and quickly cycle through this. And a typical project for us starts with some generative research. So we're in a research lab, we say, hey, photo sharing is interesting, let's go study photo sharing and let's develop new experiences in photo sharing. So we pick a domain of interest, we conduct some ethnographic style field work, we run some diary studies, a contextual inquiry, usually some combination of all these methods to understand what people are doing in that given domain. From that, we can invent tons of new concepts based on the field observations and the themes that come out, at which point we file the appropriate patents on these, and then quickly build them. So we try to build concepts really fast, in days or within weeks, of the most relevant concepts, and then get them into people's hands for months at a time, and really start to see how they adopt it, how they use it in their daily life. And then keep iterating on that until we feel that we have something we can take to market, and then we start working with business teams within the company to take these things out to market, either as a public beta or as a product, part of a new phone that we're shipping, something that comes default on the new devices that we're making. So that's the basic process that we go through, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of those steps. But here are some selected research threads from this time. So, we started looking at photo use, music use. We made a bunch of concepts out of those. Some of those things turned into products that had hundreds of millions of people using them. Some were public betas that had tens of thousands of people using them. Some of these things turned into, for example, MotoBLUR, which is the way that all the different social networks are aggregated on different Motorola phones. That came from some study of location sharing and music and photos, and that kind of all came together here. We looked at sports media for a little while. This is the case study I'll actually be talking about in detail here, which is going from studying how people communicate across generation and distance, to building a quick prototype and fielding it, to then having a public beta that's out there right now. And we've also been looking at health and well-being recently. So lots of different domains, but in each domain we apply the same process. And that's really the process that I want to talk about here, and how some of the basic methods need to change for mobile, because mobile is different than working at a desk, working in a fixed location. So the use of mobile technology is place-based, which makes it very difficult to study how people use mobile technology. You can't just bring someone in a lab and have them interact with mobile technology the way you might have them interact with a website. It's about understanding how people work out in the world, how people are using these in their daily lives. And a lab study is not going to show you how these things fit into a daily life, what people's usage is really like. Because the usage is opportunistic and it occurs sporadically throughout the week. So when you're doing generative research with mobile, you need to augment direct observation and interviews with some kind of instrumentation or diary methods. So you need to be able to keep a log of what people are doing on their device throughout the time period that you're interested in, or have a way for people to keep a diary, either a voicemail diary or an app on the phone where they can record the experiences of interest that you're trying to record in your generative research. So a common generative study for us looks like this. We have an initial interview where we usually ask questions about our domain of interest. We get some background frequency data on how often they're doing the thing we're interested in. We usually have a tour of their home or their office or their car or whatever kind of the prime area we're interested in. Sometimes we'll walk around their campus with them or something like that if we're studying students, just so we know the kinds of places where they're probably using whatever we're interested in. Then we have a data collection period where we sometimes put an app on the phone that monitors whatever we're interested in, how often certain apps are being used, when they're being used. We almost always have a diary with voicemail logging. So if we're interested in communication across generation and distance, every time you call your grandma, let us know. Every time you email her, send her a photo, anything, call our voicemail, let us know, because we want to collect that data as close to the time it actually happened as possible, because then we'll get the best details and people will actually remember that interaction and what just happened. In some cases, we've actually had people record their phone calls for us or give text message logs with consent of all parties. Very important if you decide to do that method. But that gives us a ton of really great data. Let's say we give them an app to use and we have them record their phone call. We hear how they talk about it to other people and how they explain the experiences that they're having with that new application. And then finally, in the final interview, we follow up on the data that we received in the diaries and the logs. We try to resolve any ambiguities that were there and get more data to explain what they told us in the diaries and the logs. And that usually gives us enough where we can invent hundreds of new concepts for a given domain. So we usually do some quantitative analysis of all the logs, but then we do large-scale grounded theory affinities based on all the data, all the qualitative data that we get. We can have affinities, the one on the left there, I believe is something like 2,600 notes. That was from a music study. But generally we're in the 1,000 to 2,000 note range of the data that we get from one of these studies. We find themes in the data, and then we ground our design ideas directly in the themes that came out. And all these little orange stickies here are design ideas that are based on the data that's shown on the rest of the wall. And I'll give an example. I'll give a bunch of examples in a few minutes of specific insights that we pulled out of the qualitative data in different domains. So once we have an idea, then we build it. Like I said before, we want to build it very, very quickly, in days or within weeks. And then we want to evaluate it in realistic situations. So have people use it for months at a time on their primary devices with their real social networks and getting a diversity of participants using it. And we believe all those are critically important in evaluating how these new services are adopted in daily life. If you change any of these, you're not going to really see how something is adopted. You give people they don't know to use something with, they're not going to use it in the same way they use it with their friends and family. And then we strongly believe in killing projects at every stage. So if we finish some generative research and don't have any good concepts, we can just throw out a whole domain and say we don't want to do anything there. If we have a design idea that we work on a little bit and doesn't lead to a compelling solution, we'll kill it. If we do a field evaluation and people aren't really using it as much as we think they should to have a compelling concept, we'll kill something there. So the whole idea of research in a large corporation like Motorola is risk mitigation. So we're working on a whole bunch of different concepts, and if we see something through to the end, it better be something the company can go make millions or hundreds of millions of dollars on, or we should have given up long ago. So that's a little background to all of that. And so then once we've built something, we want to evaluate it. We want to answer the research questions about adoption and sustained use. And ultimately, we want to know, do these experiences really change people's lives? Do they bring joy? Do they improve the relationships that they have? Because those are the kinds of things that we would want to ship in a product. And so we evaluate for 3 or more weeks in daily life. We again use the diaries and voicemails to get data while they're using it. And then we have semi-structured interviews at the end of the study. Sometimes if it's multiple months, we might do it once in the middle as well, so they don't forget everything that they did for a whole summer. But then we'll always do it again at the end. And we collect tons and tons of data, so we super instrument all our apps, so we know every click, every screen view, every interaction that they've had throughout the couple months they've been using it. So we do an analysis of that as well. So now I'll get to specifics. I'll give some quick case studies in the top 3 domains there, and then I'll go into much more detail in this intergenerational communication project. So this is going way back, almost 9 years ago now. We were interested in photo sharing, and the first camera phones were just coming out, and we said, wow, sharing is going to be really important here because these are personal communication devices, and now they have cameras and internet connections. So we wanted to understand what people were doing with photo sharing at the time, just in their daily lives. So how did they take photos? How did they share them? How did they organize them? How did they decide what goes on display in their homes? How did they decide what to share with other people? So we did some home tours, we did semi-structured interviews, we had people keep a diary of any photos that they took or shared over several weeks, and then asked them about those. And from this study, we came up with a bunch of different concepts. For the first thing we saw is we asked people to describe photos that were in their collection. And the things that they remembered about those photos were most commonly the place it was taken, the people who were in the photo, and the rough time frame of when that photo occurred. So we built a system that would automatically tag photos with faces. It did face detection and recognition. It used the location of the device to automatically put it on a map. This, as far as we know, is the first interface that displayed photos on a map, interactive map, where you could click on it and bring up the photos. And that was on a mobile device. And then we also built a voice interface where you could just say, show me pictures of Frank from the last 2 weeks, and it would. So these came directly from the data that we collected. Some of these were possible to, well, they were all possible to implement at the time, but not necessarily possible to implement on the phones of the time, which were still quite limited in terms of their processing power. We did most of this on iPads back then, but you can see some of these things would still be quite useful if they were implemented today. Those are some neat concepts that came out of that, some of which we evaluated for some time. And then we turned a few of them into products. So we had a public beta that we did with Yahoo called Zone Tag, and this was launched in 2006, and it allowed you on any feature phone out there, on the Razr, on the Sliver, any J2ME enabled device, to take a photo and automatically tag it with the city, state, and zip code where you were. And it used the cell ID, the cell tower that your phone was talking to get the location. So you didn't need a device with GPS at the time. And then it would show you a list of tags you might want to apply to that photo on Flickr based on where you were, based on your friends, based on events that were occurring in that spot at the time. And you could just click them and upload it to Flickr without needing to type anything on those horrible 12-key keypads at the time. So we launched that in 2006. And then we also had the Media Finder, which was it's probably, I'll just say, a dumbed down version of that nice voice-based interface we saw before. This was just a list where you could say, find photos by date, find photos by location, find photos by those time frame things that I talked about earlier. And that we had shipped on over 150 million phones that shipped from Motorola over several years. So one of the other areas that we then explored after that was music. And so we did a study looking at how context affects music selection. So we did some home tours. We saw where people kept physical music in their home, and music on their computers as well at the time, and iPods as people were starting to get them. And we did a contextual inquiry in the home and in the car, having people perform music selection tasks for different events. So we asked people what kind of events they usually play music at. And then we said, okay, let's say they played it when their friends came over to play cards. We said, okay, your friends are coming over to play cards. Find the music, do whatever you do to get the music for that situation. Or get some music for a road trip and go out to your car and get ready to play it as you're leaving. So we saw the music selection process in action. And that music selection process really led us to some really cool concepts. The first one on the left here is what we called the metadata knob, or the music dial. The idea behind this was it's a tangible interface. You could also implement it on a screen, but a way to select music around a certain metadata attribute. So we saw people would start playing music and they'd be like, no, I want something faster, I want something slower, or I want something newer, or I want something older. So you just set the dial to a given attribute, like the year, and you turn it up and get newer stuff, you turn it down and you get older stuff. You can set it to BPM, you can get faster music or slower music. You can set it to you most recently played, and you can get music you've played recently, music you haven't played recently. Music you've played a lot, music you hardly ever play. And so that concept came directly from watching someone trying to get to the music she wanted to listen to study, and not being able to find something that was at the right speed for her while she was working. The one in the middle here is we call the ambient memory player. And this came from a user comment during the initial study. She was going through a stack of CDs and she's like, this one reminds me of 1998 on the patio with my sister in our Nike sweatshirts with a fire going in the backyard, and just it brought out this amazing memory for her of this time in her life. So we said, well, there's this tie between music and photos. So we built on an existing music player a tie to the photos that were in your collection, and we brought up photos that were taken around the times that you would either listen to that music or the years when that music came out or was added to your collection. So hopefully trying to serendipitously show you some photo that had something to do with that music that was playing. And then the last one was what we called the play tree. And the idea here is it's a little more interactive random playlist. So people played music on random a lot, especially at this time, and they'd end up skipping through tracks because it wasn't really what they wanted when the next random song came up. So here we decided to give people 4 options, and if they did nothing, it would just automatically keep going to the first one. But if they wanted to, they could choose another option, and each one of these is related to the song that's playing in a given way. So maybe it's something by the same artist, maybe it's something in the same genre, something from the same year, and the idea would be the user could basically start teaching the system, I want stuff from this time frame, or I want stuff from this artist, and the random playlist would just keep getting better and better with very minimal interaction. So another area that we looked at was what I called ambient communications. And the idea here was, before Facebook feeds and all this other stuff that was coming out, we saw that people would get these updates from friends coming in on, through photos, through music, through various sources about their location, coming into them on their mobile device. And so we did our music and photo studies that I talked about earlier. We also did a study on location sharing in phone calls. So we had people record all their phone calls for a week that they and the persons they were talking to were okay with us listening to. They could delete anyone they didn't want to share with us. But we listened to it to find out how they talked about location with their friends and family. So when did someone share their location with their friends? And why did they share their location? Were they trying to meet up there? Was it just a contextual reference? Oh, I'm just getting on the subway. Was it a way to end a phone call? I'm about to go into an elevator. Things like that. How people talked about their location with each other. And from that, we saw that people often knew, especially for their close friends and family, the approximate places that they were at during the day. You know, someone leaves for work around 7 in the morning, they come home around 6 at night, but the transition times were what was not known, and what's often really important. So we built this motion presence concept, which is a phone book that shows your contacts, and if they're currently moving between places or stationary at a place, and how many minutes they've either been moving or at that place. And so it wouldn't share the location. It wouldn't say, I'm at monster.com right now. It would just say, I haven't been moving for an hour or so. And then anyone who knows that I was here and I'd be talking, you know, this whole thing lasts 2 hours before we all leave, then they'd know, oh, I have an hour left, and then I'll probably be leaving here, which probably is about right. So that's the way that worked. And we saw that people used it in really interesting ways. They used it to get more time at their current activity. So let's say you were meeting up with someone, you knew it took them a half an hour to get to wherever you're going to meet up with them, and they've only been moving for 5 minutes. Well, now you have 25 minutes to do whatever you want because they're running late. And you don't have to call back and forth. You don't have all this annoying coordination going on. You just look at the app. We had another app called Music Presence that Drew Harry, one of our summer interns, worked on. And it was just a list of all the music that your friends were playing that would come into your SMS inbox. So if you just glanced at your SMS inbox, you could see what your friends were listening to and get this awareness of what they were doing and the kinds of music they were listening to. We also had a photo presence app that was this feed of photos and comments on photos that were coming in from your friends, and that was 2006 or so, just before the feed launched on Facebook. So we created a product out of this in 2008 that was called MotoBLUR, and this shipped on 20 million or so Motorola handsets, and it was a new phone book for the device that brought together data from Facebook, Flickr, Twitter, all these different media sources in your life. So if I wanted to see what a particular friend of mine was up to recently on social media, I could just go into the phone book on my phone, look at their entry, and see this aggregated view of everything. It also kept track of someone's communication history, so you could see how you've communicated with that person via Facebook messages, text messages, the last time they called you, all of that information right in one coordinated place on the device in the phone book. And this was the main differentiator for Motorola on Android for a number of years. And one of the coolest things I liked about it was you could communicate back with someone by any means. So let's say someone sent you a Facebook message, you could reply with an SMS, or you could reply with a phone call. Because it brought all these different communication mechanisms together, it made it very easy then to communicate with them through any means, whatever is most appropriate at the time.
I'm thinking quite a bit about security lately, and woven into what I'm thinking about these days, and so I'm thinking intelligence professionals. It seems like it would be really helpful.
I'm sure they're doing all this kind of stuff. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure the CIA can do all this stuff.
Has intelligence, have you worked with intelligence?
I have not, no.
Couldn't say if you would.
I stay on the consumer side. So that's what we did with the ambient communications work. And now I'm just going to go into a little more detail so you can get a sense of how the process works and talk about this study we did on intergenerational communication. So this was starting from a field study we did looking at how people communicate with their parents or grandparents over about 1,000 miles. We built an initial concept from this. Actually, Sujoy, sitting back there, built the initial concept when he was an intern for me. We did a field study of that, and then a public beta that's still live today. So I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. So why were we interested in elder communication and distance communication? Well, the population is aging. We're close to having 20% of our population over 65, and the population is distributed. So 43% of Americans live more than an hour away from their parents. You have this rapid growth of retirement destinations where parents are moving to warmer areas, and you also have adult children moving all over the country and now all over the world for jobs. So there's a clear need to develop experiences that bring family together over generations and distance. So we started with what we called the Elder Communication Study, and we wanted to understand how people communicate today over a distance and over generations, and what tensions came out of that, what challenges they faced, what were really good moments in communicating over the distance and generations, and then what artifacts were in the home that tried to prompt a remembrance and communication with the distant family. So the study's design looked like this. We had initial in-person interviews where we did home tours, both with the children and with the older adults, and we asked them questions about their recent communication. For 3 weeks, we had a diary log where anytime they had a communication with the other person or thought about the other person in any kind of detail, we asked them to call us and tell us about that communication that they had. And we also had them take photos of the places where they communicated or any artifacts of communication if they sent a letter or photo or something like that. And then we had final in-person interviews where we clarified the log entries and asked some general questions about their communication and did a grounded theory affinity on the data here, which helped us come up with the design ideas. We recruited 10 participants, parents who were living down in Central Florida and adult children living up in Chicago, which is about 1,000 miles apart. And we recruited through a professional recruiting agency because we really wanted a diversity of people that you can really only get well when you recruit professionally. So what did we learn? We learned about the concept of the family being really important in this communication across generation, both to the elders and to the children. And having this idea of an ideal family state and family history and doing things together and sort of the role of the parent as offering advice and having that concept of family in the communication. And one that we really liked that I'll come back to at the end is this quote on the bottom. The child participant from Chicago, number 2, was going past a theater. And it was a theater where her grandfather used to dance when he was on military leave. And she took a photo of it and put a little subject on it where Pops used to dance and sent it to her mom. So this was a place, a real-world place that she was walking by that prompted this communication related to that place and its importance in family history. And that led us to the concept that I'll talk about in a minute. Another one of the observations was how communication really has to fit into everyday life. This one participant, I talked to them on the train, at the gym, in the car, at home, on the roof, on the beach, inside a tanning bed. These are the places where she communicated because it was convenient for her. But we also saw how people seek out comfortable places to communicate. Nice couches. Someone had a spot on their floor that they thought was really comfortable where they'd sit and write letters. But these very comfortable places were important to them. And we also saw the importance of fixed communication spaces in really hindering communication. So one of our participants, he was an older gentleman, and we asked him where he communicates, and he says, "You mean where the phone hangs on the wall?" And that's the only place he could communicate from because the phone was his way of communicating. But that also hinders video conferencing because it often occurs in these fixed spaces, especially with older adults who have desktops and have to go in the basement or some unused office to communicate via video. And then we also learned about how the stories of daily life creates this togetherness over the distance. And just talking about the little events each day make you that much closer to the person at a distance. So getting a new dog or a party that one of the people's kids has, and trying to bring that remote person into those events of daily life was really important. So we had a few design implications that came out of this. First, that the systems we create should try to evoke this family history and shared memories. That the communication should be integrated into everyday life, and that it should recreate these feelings of being together. And there's that quote that I talked about earlier about the theater, and that really inspired the concept that we came up with, which is called Serendipitous Family Stories. And in this concept, parents and grandparents can record videos about their lives growing up in the city. And they'll save those to the place on the map where they occurred. And then their kids or their grandkids can get notifications on their phone whenever they walk near one of those places. So the phone will just start vibrating whenever you walk near the place of one of these stories. And if you take the phone out, you can watch that video. You can watch your parents talking to you and telling you that story about that place and the family history in their daily life. So that really came directly from this quote right here and this observation from the study, as well as the other design implications that we had. So here's the quick system that we created for the first field study. And it was a web interface where you could use a Google map and pick a spot to save the story to. You could choose how close someone had to be to that spot. So you could make it so they had to get right up next to it, or they could be like a mile away. And you could adjust that. And then you used your webcam to just record yourself telling that story about the importance of that place in your life. And this is what we had the parents and grandparents use. And then there was a mobile interface just really quickly cobbled together because we wanted to test the experience, not any of the look and feel of it, where when you got near a story, this screen would pop up and you could click on the video and watch the video, and you could see your parents. These are actually my parents. You could see them telling the story that they wanted to tell. And then when you were done, you could quickly call them or text them or send a little message that you liked it. So it was just simple communication tied directly off of the media itself. And so you could get these serendipitously as you walked around, but there was also a compass interface that would say, go 2 miles north and you'll find the nearest story. So if you want to go out hunting for them, you could also make a game out of it. And so, as I mentioned earlier, our evaluation philosophy is to get these things in the field as early as possible, try to improve the concept, mitigate risk, understand how it's used in a mobile context. And we really want to do this cheap, fast, and make it informative. So we really want to do this as quickly as possible. So this is the study that we did. We had 10 parents and grandparents down in Florida. We had their 10 children or grandchildren in some cases up in Chicago. We met with the older adults first in their homes. We set up the web interface for them, connected a webcam if they needed it, had them create 5 to 10 stories for their kids or their grandkids. And then during the study, if the kids or grandkids ever talked to them about those stories, we wanted them to call us and tell us about that experience of hearing from their kids. And then we had a final interview at the end. After the parents created the stories, we met with the children. We put the app on their Android phone. They used it for a month in their daily life. Again, called our voicemail diary whenever they found one of these stories. Or if they had difficulties finding a story, they could also call us. And then we had a final interview at the end. So people were talking about all sorts of things. They talked about family outings, holiday events, neighborhood events from growing up, old sports leagues that they were in, or movies that they went to. They talked a lot about dating and their lives, as a teenager in the city. And they decided their kids are in their 20s or 30s. They're old enough now to hear about these things. So for many of the kids, this is the first time they had heard this side of their parents' lives. And they talked about work. And you can see some of the details of what they talked about here. But they talked about basically their life growing up in all different aspects. During the 4 weeks of the study, the kids and the grandkids found most of the stories. 83% of them were found. They talked about it as a cute little treat and a happy experience that brought a smile to your face. Sometimes they'd be totally shocked that one of these stories would pop up. They'd just be going to work or going to meet a friend, and the story would come up, and they'd learn about the importance of that place in the life of their family. Sometimes they'd go out hunting for stories. One guy knew that his dad was a lawyer, and he's like, oh, there'll be a ton of stuff at the courthouse, and went down to the courthouse to try to see what his dad had left there. But it could get annoying. We had these notifications come up when you got close. And before you could actually get to the spot where you were able to unlock it. And some people were on the subway or the elevated train, and every day they'd get oh, you're getting close to the story. But they can't just stop the train and jump off and get close enough to unlock it. So sometimes that was a little bit annoying, and we fixed that in the public beta. But we found that the system really brought about strong memories and emotion. People cried, people laughed, people really got emotionally engaged in these videos that were coming from their parents and their grandparents. They learned about the lives of their family in new ways. One of the participants, she lives in Chicago, in the outskirts of Chicago, uses her car for absolutely everything, and she's like, my grandma didn't have a car? How did she do anything? She had to take the bus and the train, and she just couldn't imagine a life like that, and had this really long conversation with her grandma about that. And also about, the dating life and what her grandma was like as a teenager in Chicago. They had a lot of great conversations about that. One of the other participants, she knew that her relative here, I don't remember if it was her mom or her grandma, worked at one of the department stores in Chicago, but just figured she was a sales clerk, didn't actually know that she was a junior executive with the department store and had a very distinguished career there, and started talking about that and really gained a lot of respect. So I guess this was her grandma in this case. And then another, learning about, my dad was this was his father-in-law, is really into the architecture of things. I had no idea, and started talking to him about that, talked to my wife about it, and now have this totally new topic of conversation to have in the family. And people engaged with the city as well. So being places where there was family history was really interesting for them, but then learning about how the city was different at different times. There was an old amusement park in Chicago that was torn down in the 1960s, and one of our participants was going by there, got a story of her grandma's going there all the time as a teenager, called her grandma and said, "Grandma, you left this in the wrong spot. There's an office building here." And then her grandma said, "Oh yeah, but in the 50s and 60s this was an amusement park and we used to go here all the time." So really learning how the city changed was an interesting aspect of this. So we finished the study. We said, we've got a concept here that really works for people, creates these compelling interactions in the city. It increases communication, builds this awareness of family members, but we needed a more robust solution, right? What we took out in the field here was something that was, hacked together in a few weeks over a summer internship. It wasn't something we could put out there for millions of people to start using. So now we're starting to think, how could this system be used in the wild, and what can we do to make this easier for people to use? So we built this service called storyplace.me that's out there today. Here's just some screenshots from it. It's got this nice little compass interface that shows you stories that are nearby, and ones you haven't found yet, and ones you found. It shows you which way you need to walk to find them. It shows you, stories that are close by, and you can click on them and watch them. So in some ways, it's very, very similar to the Serendipitous Stories concept. But we had some new opportunities as well. So we liked the way that people were learning about the history of the city by using the system. So we partnered with WTTW, which is the PBS station in Chicago, WNET in New York, and the city of Chicago itself, who gave us a bunch of professional content clips about places in the city. So the history of Grant Park here is one example. And so you could decide in the system to follow, this is Chicago's Lakefront with Jeffrey Bear, a documentary on our local PBS station. And if you followed this in the service, whenever you got near any one of these landmarks, you'd get this professionally produced content telling you the history of this space. So that's another way for people to engage, even if they didn't have relatives who were sharing things with them right away. And then we made it so people could share with anyone. In the field trial that we built, we hard-coded who people could share with, and you didn't import networks from Facebook or other places. So we built a more robust system that where you could control for each story who got to see it. Because you might have something that you only want to share with your brother or your mom. You might have other things that you could share with all of your friends or even publicly. So now that we have all this content in here and anyone could make something public, we wanted to have a way where you could decide what you wanted to follow. So you were only notified, your phone only started vibrating if you're near a story that was explicitly shared from a friend, if you're explicitly following a collection from a friend of yours that they're publishing stuff to, or stories from any of these public collections like the Chicago Lakefront that you've chosen to explicitly follow. So it's a bit like Twitter, you decide what you want to follow, but now as you walk around, anything in those collections will vibrate your phone and tell you that you're near a story. So we put it out in the Android market. Anyone can go use the web interface, so even if your parents don't have an Android phone, they can go make stories on the web, and you can still get it as you go around the city. which is kind of nice. We put it out there with no publicity. This was really just, let's see what happens. We had 1,000 downloads pretty quickly, of people starting to use it, some nice reviews that came in. And so now we're gathering more and more data of how people are using this as more people sign up, seeing where they're creating stories, how they're using this system, who they're sharing things with, how their networks are building, how they're using the public content versus the private content. So this is our ongoing research, and it's out there as a public beta for anyone who wants to play around with it. And there are some collections here in Cambridge and in Boston as well, but it's only on Android right now. So just a little summary of the case study. We really wanted to build a deep understanding of current behavior so we could come up with the design guidelines and the concept here, and return to users at multiple steps in the process. Rapidly prototyping and evaluating this concept can reduce risk. It can also focus the design in new ways. All the public content, when we started this, we had no idea we'd be working with PBS stations, but we saw that opportunity as we were iterating and building the concept out. And in that way, your final concept might be a little different from what you originally envisioned, but we think that's cool. And a lot of people are just using it for the public content and really enjoying learning about their city. So I just wanted to close with talking a little bit about the class that I teach at MIT, and then I'll be happy to take questions. So this is a Mobile HCI class that I've been teaching for the last 6 years. Basically, students work in small teams. They propose, design, build, and document a semester-long project on mobile apps. And we have them follow this exact process that I was just talking about here today, where they start with generative research, they come up with a concept, they design it out, they build it, and then they evaluate it in people's lives for several weeks at a time. So we teach, I teach it with Ed Barrett, who's my co-author on the book, who unfortunately, he said he might have been here by the end of the talk, but I think he's stuck in traffic. He's coming down from Vermont today. But we teach it in a 3-hour block each Tuesday night. And it's a semester-long group project. We have lecture and collaborative work time and time for critique involved in each class. Ed and I teach it. We've had some great TAs over the years, and really these methods have come not only through the research at Motorola, but working iteratively with the class each year and really seeing how can we take some of these methods where we have a luxury of time sometimes at Motorola, because we're in a research lab, the students have 12 weeks. And they have to do this whole design process and build something and evaluate it within 12 weeks. So a lot of the quick discount methods in the book really come from some iterations that we've had with the class, and that we've really innovated with our TAs and with our students to come up with some quicker ways to do some of these methods. It's an advanced undergrad class, a few MBA students and graduate students as well, variety of different majors, which we think is really interesting, computer science students, management students, which might make sense, but also rocket scientists and mathematicians and economists, and this is why MIT is fun, because you get all these people who want to make mobile apps. So it's a really fun class. Most of all of them have never heard of HCI when the class starts. They just want to make mobile apps and they think that's cool, and we teach them the basic HCI methods that they need to design and rapidly prototype something and evaluate how it's used. So the syllabus looks very much like the book, where we start with generative research methods, they do some qualitative data analysis, they have a proposal, they do a design, they do paper prototyping and usability testing, they learn a little bit more about some mobile domains, they have a working demo, and then they field evaluate it for several weeks, and then they write a final paper that's like a Chi-style paper. But the book, very much covers these methods and goes into more detail on all of that. So just as a summary, we think it's really important before you start to do some generative research, both qualitatively and quantitatively in your domain of interest. Generate a ton of concepts from your data. From all the studies that we do, we usually generate 100, 200, 300 different concepts that come out of it, and then prioritize them and implement maybe 4 or 5 of them. And quickly build out those top concepts and see how they're used, sustained use in daily life, and then learn from those field evaluations so you can improve your concepts or just kill things that aren't working out. So all this is detailed in the book. It uses extensive examples from Motorola, some of the ones I've talked about today, and some other ones, other examples from the Mobile HCI literature and what other people have been doing at the Mobile Life Center in Stockholm and other places throughout the world, and follows the topics in the class. And we'll have a few to raffle off in a few minutes here. But I want to thank a ton of people first, a lot of my colleagues at Motorola who have helped refine these methods over the years, and really have been instrumental in creating all the concepts that I showed today, as well as a bunch of folks at MIT. Ed Barrett, who's the co-author on the book and the guy that I teach the class with, our TAs that we've had, and now over 250 students who've taken the class. And all the students have really contributed to the methods as well, because each year we see what works and what doesn't for their different projects that they do. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Frank. We have about 15 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
From all in the generational phase, when you're looking at people's comments and the things that they do, how do you figure out the signal from the noise and work on the pieces that you want to start with, such as the one that you said, oh, I want to find, the knob concept or took a photo of the dance hall.
Right.
You must have, you have 1,000 of those.
Sure, we do. Yeah.
How do you get it down to that nugget?
Yeah. Well, so we look through, so let's say we have 1,000 or 1,500 different post-its, and we group those, right? So we find things that are similar. In the case of that music example, there were several people who were trying to get to music that was like something, faster or slower, newer or older, something that fit the situation in different ways. So we had a grouping around that. And we had lots of groupings about other things as well. And we had design ideas on all these. The dial was the design idea that was on that one group. And so let's say that study probably generated about 200 different concepts. We evaluated it on a whole wide range of different aspects. So, the breadth of the population that this could be useful for, the time to market, Motorola's willingness to do something in that space, the patentability of concepts in that area. These are all things that we use to evaluate the concepts that we have. And that one rose to the top as something interesting. And interesting and fun, too. We want to work on interesting and fun things. So yeah, we rate them on a whole bunch of different scales and things that come to the top for what we work on. Often when we have interns come in, we'll give them maybe the top 5 or 6 ideas from a study and say, what are you interested in? Pick one and run with it. So that's how we do this. Yeah.
You said you really emphasize quickly building all of your concepts. And so I was wondering how you must have to quickly design them too, the interface.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you experimented at all with multiple interfaces, or how you kind of came to such a quick design in order to build it.
Yeah, so usually what we're trying to test is the experience itself and not the interface. We could care less what it looks like as long as it's functional for people. And we explain that to them when we feel these things, right? We just want to see how you deal with these stories that you get that come to you as you walk around. Don't pay any attention to the interface. So it's really, we mock them up quickly, we build them quickly. Sometimes we iterate a little bit on it, but it's usually get something good enough so that it works functionally, and then just explain to people that we're very early stages, and then we get better comments as well, because it's not some super polished interface. They're commenting on the actual experience and not, oh, it's ugly. Well, of course it's ugly, and we're telling you that up front. So that's generally how we do it.
Follow up on this control knob and/or slider gesture. How easy is that to be transportable for the understandability? When people have cell phones, we have thin pipes.
Yeah.
We have very poor, uneven quality.
Yeah.
And so early attempts on cell phones were things like, well, the middle of your number to the left, tap it and it goes down one notch slower a bit. Tap it to the right, one notch slower a bit. That wasn't widely even known, so I don't know how fair it is to say that that's a very good idea, but it's better now with a touch Homescreen, obviously, and the built-in pretty much default at this point is exterior tactile toggle for louder or softer. How easy would it be to have that kind of thing for slower or faster? We have small pipes, we have a whole world full of languages,
Sure.
etc.
Yeah, there are plenty of ways you could implement that slower or faster music dial. You could use the volume rocker on your
I'm
phone.
talking about in the video playing the storytelling.
What do you mean for slower or faster then?
To understand it at all. You know how difficult it is sometimes to understand a voicemail message when you're out.
Yeah. So that was actually an issue with some of the stories. So one of the stories was left underneath the elevated tracks in Chicago. And it's very, very loud underneath the elevated tracks in Chicago. And the person played it and they saw their mom talking and couldn't hear it at all. But we made it so you could play it back someplace else. And so as soon as they got to the office, they played it back and listened to it
And
again.
then as an augmented idea of regenerative sessions, design sessions, has the feasibility of actually basically having it translated, again, to learn new language of jargon, whether or not it's a science course or of another cultural language or of jargon of youth versus the parents and the youth.
Yeah, that could be interesting if the parents were using words or talking about things that the kids didn't understand, having ways to see that. Yeah.
So you mentioned that working at the Motorola lab is a luxury.
Yeah.
Because you have so much time and you get to do this broad generative research.
Sure.
Compared to like the startup environment where there's lots of mobile innovation happening, how would you compare and contrast like how a startup has to operate and do research and change this process because it's different than an academic process and it's different than
It is. I would say it's closer to what our students do because in 12 weeks they have to have a running concept that's been evaluated in somebody's life. So that's a very, very quick process, but very iterative as well. So if you're a startup and you can make a new concept every 12 weeks like that and keep iterating on it, that's pretty good. But I think it is definitely different. We're focusing on everything we do on making it publishable and rigorous because we publish, and that's what we're rewarded on as a research lab. So if you're not trying to publish on something and you really just want quick data to help make your design better, you can cut a lot of corners, right? You don't have to do maybe a 3-month study. You could do something in a month, right? If that's all the time you have. You don't have to get maybe 20 users or 30 users for something. You could get a smaller number, right? So there are ways you can cut it down budget-wise as well. If you're a startup without a lot of cash and need to get some data quickly. But I still think you shouldn't skimp on having people use something for multiple weeks because that's when you really start to see how something's adopted. We always see in every study we run, the first couple weeks usage data is very different from the next few weeks. And it's really looking at how that sustained use works if you're trying to figure out a business model, right? Or is someone going to use this more than for the first week? So you want to understand that. Yeah.
Hi, I just wondered about a term that you used. I actually went to the Institute of Science in Chicago.
Yeah.
But you used a term about affinity diagram.
Yeah.
Rounded theory, and I haven't heard the rounded theory part.
So our affinity diagrams are a little different from the Byron-Holtzclaw affinity diagrams. So what we do is we start from the raw data itself. So every note is a quote that somebody said. And we use grounded theory. So we're starting from the base of the individual quotes. We're finding patterns and themes in those. And then we're bringing those themes together to tell the larger story of what's happening in the data. So it's based on grounded theory from anthropology and going directly off the user quotes. And we believe that's really important. The Byron-Holtzclaw method starts with researcher summaries, which makes for a much quicker affinity because you don't have as many researcher summaries as you have raw data elements, but you lose the raw data elements. And what you saw here for the Serendipitous stories example, the idea came from the raw element. If we would have just used researcher summaries, we might not have even had the detail that was necessary to come up with the concept. So it takes longer because there's more of them, but doesn't take that much longer, and we think it's really worth it. Yeah.
I have a question. When you build your prototype to do your multi-week testing on the usage, what's your policy, or if it changes, it varies, on iterating on that prototype as they're using it? Do you leave it untouched for the length of the study, or is it something that you alter as you find like serious issues?
It depends how much we want to publish it. So, you know, if you write a Chi paper and you change the prototype 3 times in the middle, it's probably not going to get accepted. But, you know, for the most part, we are an industry research lab, so we should change it. If we see something that's not working, we should change it. And most of the time we do. Sometimes we have that conversation, oh, this is something major. If we really change this, it's totally not going to be publishable. But for the most part, we'll change it. I'm running a study this summer that I changed a couple things partway through. Even added a whole supplemental web interface to it because the mobile interface just wasn't giving people all the data they need. Yeah.
Going back to the elevated tracks, how did you solve the problem of the person getting alerted to the video and not being able to unlock it at the moment? Do you remember?
Yeah. So the person who was on the elevated tracks every day getting the notification that there was a story nearby, but not quite near enough to actually unlock it and watch it. So what we did in the story place, the public beta version, is on any story, once you get the first notification, you can say, don't remind me about this again unless I get close enough to actually watch it. So for anything that's annoying you like that, it's just one press on it and that option pops up that you can say, just ignore this. So that made it easy so people didn't keep getting bombarded with those. And then if they did get close enough to watch it at some point, they'd still be reminded of it. So we thought that was a happy medium.
I'm kind of curious about how it transitions from a research product to, like, does it shift to an actual product team once it's established that it might be a viable product for Motorola?
Yeah. So the question was about transition from research to product teams, and it happens all different ways. So for BLUR, the social network aggregator Phonebook, we had the concept, we did a detailed design of it with our design group, actually the folks from ID. We did a detailed design with them, so they were in a product team, but research and the product team were working together on that design, and then it transferred to an engineering team that actually built it out. So that was one where we transferred it off to the engineering team that actually built it. In the story place example, we built the whole thing. So we built the whole public beta ourselves in research and launched that ourselves.
So, like, in terms of, like, the business objectives, like the public stuff, did you guys have to deal with corporate?
Yeah. I deal with all kinds of corporate stuff all the time, but yeah. So we had to make a business case for it. We had to figure out how much it was going to cost to run it and operate it. We had to have specific objectives that we wanted to get out of it. So anything that we're going to run ourselves for some long period of time, we need to justify why we're going to do that and not work through a product team.
So you talked a lot about the kind of rapid prototyping of the bigger ideas.
Yeah.
Could you say a few words about what you've learned about the technology that supports that rapid prototyping? So have you been able to use a lot of tools that Motorola already had out of the box, or have you actually had to rapidly prototype tools to allow you to rapidly prototype the ideas?
We've definitely had to rapidly prototype some of the underlying technology. So for the story place example, we needed a way to run a background process for location that wasn't going to kill the battery. And if any of you have downloaded Google's recent field trip app, that kills your battery. They did not implement the right algorithm for that. But we had to implement a way that would really do that in a smart, power-efficient way based on your distance to the story and how much you were moving around. And we did iterate on that quite a bit between the initial concept and when we took it to the field. The motion presence example was another one where we were using cell tower transitions to determine if you were moving between places. But your phone naturally transfers between a few cell towers just sitting in a building. So we had to develop an algorithm that would figure out when you were actually moving versus not moving. And yeah, that took a couple weeks, but it was a lot of iteration on that. Every day, multiple iterations trying to get it around certain edge cases we observed. So we do that as well.
I've worked in a lot of companies where there's been a distinct lack of will to kill projects.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you found that difficult, and what criteria do you use to kill an idea off? If everybody's excited about it, or how do you
Yeah,
approach
I
that?
mean, it's usually pretty obvious if an idea should be killed. And we're researchers, so we have plenty of other ideas we could be working on, right? So like I said, one of these studies, we have 100 or 200 ideas that come out. So if we start prototyping something, it's just not working out, or we do a field evaluation and we see that nobody's really using it, or it's not appreciably improving their lives in any way, yeah, well, it's just not something we're going to continue on. And we decide, we're the gate between the research team and the product team. So we decide what we even show to the product team to start working on. And so if we see something's not panning out, we're not going to show it to a product team. So we're not going to gate it to the next step then. And it's usually not that hard because we have so many ideas of things we can do. Cool.
One more question?
I saw your hand.
Well, just in line with this, do you have a case library? Well, imagine that a year or two later you go, oh my goodness, this technology has changed, these circumstances, let's go back and look at that again.
We should do that more. We should. We do have a library of all the design ideas that we've had and all the patents we filed based on them, but we only pursue a small number of those. And it's definitely true. If I go back and look at some of the music use cases, I'm sure there are things that we could build now that we didn't prioritize back then because they'd be too hard to make. So we should. We don't really, but we should. And I think that was it for questions, but you can come and find me for the next half hour.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much.